Hey guys, it's Matt here, and today I'm doing another episode of Matt Rants, and this one's going to be a bit more serious compared to some of the other ones that I've done so far. Now, today I'll be talking to you guys about recently. So let's start with the recent controversy that has come up with gun violence and video games. So, personally, I'm not going to talk to you guys about guns in particular in the real world because that's not really what we do here. We don't really talk about stuff like that here on the channel, or if you're listening to this to our Blog Talk Radio account on there either. So we're not going to get into different kinds of politics and things like that. And maybe I'll delve a little bit into mental health as it relates to video games as well, but or to people as well. But really here I just want to stick to the games themselves and why, and I'm just going to be very clear here, why a lot of the recent controversy surrounding video games as a whole is a bunch of bullshit. And yes, I'm going to get be very clear here, very open, very honest with you guys. It is just straight up bullshit. And now, why do I say that? Well, the reason why is because the recent discussion that has surrounded video games is not a new one. In fact, when I think back to when these things were first being discussed, it feels as if we're getting another type of 90s reboot or a 90s, nostalgia flashback that we've been getting with things like Full House or a bunch of other, programs or games or things like that, movies or things like that, that we're just kind of getting that nostalgia overload. It seems to have come back to violence in video games. Now, why am I so adamant about this? Well, of course, some of you will say, well, you have a gaming channel. Obviously, games are a big part of your life. But I think another reason why is because if there were studies that backed up, the idea that, oh, well, clearly violence in video games causes real life violence, then I would have to say, guys, I'm sorry to tell you, but this is the case, and we have to take stricter measures towards video games. However, that is not the case at all. Looking at some different studies, video games do not, and there have been a bunch of different studies done on this over the years, over the past 20, 30 years. There have been studies that show that video games do not cause violence. However, I would like to add, though, and I need to be very clear here. I don't want to, not give you guys the other side of the argument or the side of the other studies that have been done. Apparently there has been studies that have been done that do show that the violent video games that are played by children can lead to aggressive behavior. Now, what does that mean? Aggressive behavior does not equal violence. And aggressive behavior is, of course, a very bad thing. I mean, and some people could say, well, it's just behavior, it's not necessarily violence. But of course, that can lead to hostile situations, and it could just make things more volatile. So I'm not saying that it is good that it could lead to aggressive behavior in children. However, here's something very interesting. When we use the term violent video games, well, what games are we talking about here? Right? Are we talking about Super Mario Brothers? Where we have Mario jumping on these poor little acorn men's heads. I know and then they're crushed. Is that violence, or are we talking about the violence that you would experience in a game like, GTA, Grand Theft Auto, or even something like Wolfenstein? Obviously, even the older ones, of course, were violent. A different kind of violence compared to what we see today, of course. But again, back at the time, when Wolfenstein was released, when we start going, Doom, when we start looking at later games like, obviously like something like Night Trap or Mortal Kombat, I mean, we had Senate hearings over that. So of course, like I said earlier, it really feels like we're just going back to the past here. But what kind of violence are we talking about in these video games, right? Because if we're talking about graphic violence, quote unquote, things like looking at fatalities and stuff like that, well, my response is children shouldn't be playing these games either way. And it's really frustrating for me to hear some of our congressmen on either side of the aisle looking more at this violence in video games when we already have a rating system in place, making sure that kids can't just walk up to a register and buy a game, even if it's used. We already have those in place. So it's interesting how, even though there is some legislation, it looks like there might be some legislation in place, or at least some kind of plan of action in place to kind of monitor loot boxes. It's very interesting how we literally have not gotten rid of gambling, but we've somehow looked at virtual violence and decided that, this is not fake money being gambled here, quote unquote gambled if you don't like that word, but still, for loot boxes, this is, which I might actually do a Matt Rants video in another rant. So if you guys want that, then you can comment below and discuss that as well. But when it comes to these violent video games themselves, it's so interesting that, these people that have committed these atrocities, they're not children. So that's the first thing too, by the way. So talking about protecting our children, I mean, this recent shooting in Parkland, the person was 19. So, I think many of us think of the word boy because of how much older we might be than that. But let's remember that he's not a boy. He is a man. And if he was playing violent video games, which, by the way, I'm pretty sure there is no evidence right now that he even was, but let's just pretend that he was for the sake of the argument. If he was, then he was playing them as a teenager, which, depending on what game you're looking at, some of these games are rated M. He had to have a parent buy that game for him. And then that's a choice that lies with the parent, and I think that's something that we should infringe upon. It's something that we should definitely try to maybe monitor more in some way or another, potentially through maybe some different kind of warning labels, perhaps. But again, if you have rated M right there on the cover of a game, I don't know what else we can do to try to get a parent more involved in what game they're buying for their kid. And also, I want to mention as well, of course, I'm not in any way trying to say that we have to blame parents 100%, because, of course, at the end of the day, the choice to do something like this is on the individual. However, we cannot say, at least in my opinion, that's what this whole rant is about, all these rants are about, but in my opinion, we can't just pick out violent video games and just say, well, clearly that's the culprit. Yes, video games do allow us to become the character. That is definitely true. But movies also allow us to at least take a peek into this alternate world, this alternate reality. Same thing with books as well. So to me, I feel like when we look at, these violent movies that are not new, right? Before CGI, there were practical effects. I mean, I can name a bunch of movies with practical effects that look horrifyingly real, even for their time. So thinking about some very, very violent films, I mean, one that I can think of that when I first saw it a few years ago really disturbed me was a film like A Clockwork Orange that did not come out in the past 5-10 years. Another film I can think of that I don't know if disturbing is the right word, but definitely unsettling, is Videodrome. That was a Cronenberg film, and of course Clockwork Orange, a Stanley Kubrick film. And Cronenberg, known for a lot of practical effects that involve body horror. So why have people not, I mean, if it's the movies, just like it is, the games, why have people not been placing videotapes inside their bodies and removing them, or pulling guns out of their bodies, or, doing some other horrific things? And yes, of course, some will say, well, there will always be someone that will replicate what happens in these movies and in these games. But at the end of the day, and I'm not a big fan of slippery slope arguments, but I do have to say that looking at video games as a violent medium overall, first of all, I mean, Nintendo exists. Let's all be honest here, guys. Nintendo exists. What are you doing, right? Nintendo literally sits back and says, we're making family fun games, and very few games you can get on our consoles are for more of a quote-unquote adult audience, right? And again, they do exist, yes. There's some ports, or there's some brand new games made for some consoles that are for adults. But again, most likely when you hear the phrase Nintendo product, you either think of a first party game that's family friendly, or depending on the console, you think of a awkward shovelware game that's family friendly, but I don't know if I'd pay more than $5 for it. So looking at these violent video games, we say that that is a violent medium, and then, like I mentioned earlier with the slippery slope argument, and then we say, well, we have to, either get rid of these or we have to police these. What are we going to go to, movies next? Are we going to go to books next? I mean, in your head, you can picture anything. So that is the most, I would argue books are the most violent genre, because you can write anything down and then you can interpret it in any way possible. Oh my goodness. I do think that we need to police the Game of Thrones series. I've only seen one season on HBO, although of course that should be canceled immediately now that we know about how, the violence in television shows are going to cause, not only in our world are we going to now have dragons and many things like that, but I mean, the violence in Game of Thrones, frankly, is disturbing, and I think we need to ban books and have a massive book fire. And I know I mentioned earlier this was going to be a more serious Matt Rants, but I just can't not kind of have sarcasm just irradiate off of me, hearing the fact that video games are violent, or video games cause this or cause that. What causes these issues? There are many different things that cause these issues, of course. It's not just one problem. And if someone says that video games are the only problem, then I'm going to say that you either are not playing games, you've never played a video game, or you have other motivations and you are trying to get another demographic on your side that also doesn't play video games and kind of gets to shake their fists at youth, kind of very much like the old man yells at cloud situation. And it's just, it really, really upsets me, because it doesn't matter if we sit here and if we ban all violent video games, or if we sit here and we ban all movies, violent movies, or ban all rap music. Oh no, the kids with their rap music. Oh my goodness, this is not going to stop the violence that is in this country. Now, again, I can't tell you what can, right? I don't think any of us can really say that there is only one solution. That's why you have people fighting on multiple fronts. You have people talking about different ways to look at guns. You have people talking about different ways to help people with mental illness. Now, I do not want to demonize mental illness, because I think that's the worst thing that we can do. The worst thing we can do is hear that someone has depression and think that they're going to hurt people in their class or people at their job or anything like that. So we can't do that at all. However, we do have to have better situations in place where, I've seen situations with family where they have depression and they're still in school, in a school environment, and they have guidance counselors, people you would think that would be trained to deal with this. And what they say to the parent in the situation is, well, we know that your therapist may have said that so-and-so has depression, but how could that be? They were smiling with their friends. Which, if anyone here listening understands depression, either themselves or knows someone with depression, understands that a guidance counselor saying that about a kid, not necessarily to the kid's face, but about a kid to a parent, especially if a parent doesn't know or isn't doing their research, frankly is a disgusting thing, and immediately makes me feel like that guidance counselor is unqualified to do their job. And frankly, and talking about that in a school setting, a lot of these recent shootings happening in a school setting, that is a heartbreaking story to me personally, not just because it was a family member, but it is just a heartbreaking story. So for me to hear that we are not treating mental illness properly or having the proper discussions in our society is definitely one of the things that I think is harming us and harming all of us, whether or not you have mental illness, whether or not you may experience this in your life, the fact that we as a nation are not talking. And, swinging this right back to video games, the whole, again, the point of this rant, the point of this channel, swinging it right on back to games for a second. The fact that people are not talking to their children are what the issue is. But we can't legislate talking. And that is the key issue here. It's just like how we can't legislate who can buy what game for their kid. Because I can assure you, there are going to be people, whether or not you're a fan of big government or not, that when they walk into a retail store, I don't know who still does this, but when they walk into a retail store and they talk to an employee and say, yes, my child is looking for Grand Theft Auto 75. And when that employee says, I am not allowed to sell this to you because you just said that you're going to buy it for your underage child, I can assure you it doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you're on or this person is on. They're going to say, no, I know my child. How dare you? How dare you take away my freedom or take away my rights? So we cannot legislate what someone can purchase when it comes to simple either entertainment or simply being cathartic. Video games do not kill people, right? There is no, I mean, perhaps, and I know this sounds tongue-in-cheek, but I'm actually being dead serious here. Perhaps an older, larger console, you can swing pretty hard, but you can't physically kill people with video games. You cannot. It's just, it isn't the case. So we cannot sit here and try to legislate how or what people are allowed to purchase. And sadly, we cannot even legislate how parents talk to their children. But at the very least, we need to try to have this dialogue and try to help and kind of guide parents to have this dialogue with their children. Now, what the dialogue is exactly, what's the script? Well, obviously it's going to vary per child, it's going to vary per parent, vary per household. But the way I look at it, the kind of script that I would go by is just, well, first off, I wouldn't buy the game for them either way until they're at the very least a teenager, when they can hopefully, even though there are some hormones going on there and a lot of self-identity issues that people are trying to, in their teenage years, they don't know who they are just yet. They're kind of forming their identity. But still, I still think that they're sentient enough. I know that might sound really silly, because in no way am I trying to say that kids are dumb or kids don't exist. But still, sometimes it's very hard to have people understand, or have children understand what's going on in a situation. I mean, I have another family member who, very small child at the time, played Grand Theft Auto. And due to there not being a conversation about the game itself, what ended up happening was the kid thought that the cops were the bad guys. And we're not going to get into a discussion here about, other things going on in the world right now, but just the idea that not the cops are the bad guys because X, Y, or Z, whatever's going on, whatever someone's opinion is outside of games. No, they're the bad guys because in Grand Theft Auto, they're trying to stop you from doing this or that. That's what makes them the bad guys. So you have to have conversations with your kid. And so looking back at that script here, what kind of script are we going to go with here? Again, if you aren't going to buy it for them, good for you. I would personally, say that you should go that route. But there's a chance that they're going to go over to their friend's house. They have an older brother. They have, their friend has an older brother, or their friend has a more lax family. And no matter what you say to that family, saying, hey, I don't think it's appropriate that my kid plays this game, you don't know what that family is going to do. And as much as I do like parents that are a bit more hands-on, it is a little bit restricting, and I've experienced this myself, a little bit restricting to say, no, play dates only happen here. Because then not every parent can bring their kid to your house. Yes, some parents love it. They think of it as a babysitting service. They'll just drop them off there. But some parents, it's very hard for them to bring their kid over and stuff like that, or to trust you, you as a parent, or this, imaginary parent in this situation who says only play dates in my house. So we have to have a discussion where it's, hey, I'm not going to buy this game, but if a friend has this game and you want to play it, please understand XYZ, ABC, 1, 2, 3, whatever you want to go with here, whatever your criteria is, to discussing with them how, the game is fake, right? It's false. It isn't how the world works. This isn't how you should actually, kind of play out your aggression in the future, because everyone's going to have some level of aggression somewhere. Even the nicest people have the ability to get mad. It's human emotion, in case there are people listening that don't know. Humans emote, right? Any human has the ability to emote in some way or another. So the idea is that even if you're not buying it for your kid, have a preemptive discussion on why. Don't just say, because I think the biggest harm that you can give to your child isn't even buying the game. You would think it would be, but I think it would be more so saying, you're not getting this game because I said so. Because I said so sounds like a great argument, sounds like a rational discussion, sounds like, you go, well, my family said because I said so. But I think what many people, and this might not apply to everyone, this definitely doesn't apply to me, because and I'm not just saying this because people can be listening to this in my family, I did listen to my parents when they said, because I said so. I didn't like it, but I listened. But I want people out there to understand that for any case that they heard the phrase, because I said so, from their parents, let's say it involves alcohol or drugs or something like that, right? We're real heavy stuff we're going here. When you heard the phrase, because I said so, how many of you out there said, okay, mom and dad, I won't do that, and then didn't? If you didn't, bravo. I actually do applaud you for that. That's good, right? I don't know if all of you did. And if you didn't, you have to think, my kid may not either. Maybe it'll be best if I actually have a discussion with them and explain why this game is not for them, and why there is a certain age restriction, not just on the game itself, but on the household that wants to, the household bringing in the game, you bringing in the game for your child. Also, if you are going to get the game for them, if you think, well, my child can handle it, well, again, if you think your child can handle it, okay, but you also, again, better have that discussion backed up, because you do not want that child to think, this is how the world works. This is the way things are. This is what I should do. Video games, for anyone listening that doesn't know this, maybe you've never played a game yourself, or, you want to show this someone, if you have played a game, you want to show this someone who's never played a game themselves. Video games are about letting loose your aggression, letting out that pent-up rage into a situation that is completely kind of violence free. And I know that might not seem that way if you walk by and see a young person, so a youth, playing Call of Duty, playing even some Star Wars games, right? Even though those really are not as violent, but still, you see a game with guns and your first thought is, oh no, they're shooting people with these guns. And depending on the game, oh no, there's blood splurting. Even if there's no guns involved and it's a fighting game, oh no, this person just ripped out the other one's spine and then choked them with it. Standard Tuesday stuff. If you see that and you think, oh, this is horrifying, clearly it's influencing them. Again, if it's not a child playing, the idea is you do it in the game and then you feel fine and then you walk away. The same way that, back in the day, and I'm sure there's still people that do this, back in the day when you have not even the punching bag, just the meat, right? Just the meat in the meat locker hanging down, and you get your boxing gloves, or you just kind of wrap your arms up and just start punching. It's that kind of thought. It's doing that without actually, I would say not hurting your hands, but to be fair, you can get arthritis or other kinds of issues with your hands over time. But the point is you're doing this not to say it's not a training exercise. I do know that the military does use certain games, I don't think it's Call of Duty, but certain types of military games as train exercises. They do. But you're not using, these are not your kids, your grandkids, your nephews, your nieces, right? They're not using these games as target practice. Now, I understand you don't want people to get desensitized to the violence. And I understand where you're coming from 100%, but you can't stop that from happening in every single medium, right? All someone has to do is see a 20-year-old zombie movie, and oh boy, right, the amount of graphic violence in that alone is absolutely terrifying, right? And I think another thing that matters as well, when looking at the violence in some of these video games, especially when it comes to, really young kids playing it, in case anyone's listening to this thinking of tips or like what games they should and shouldn't play, I would argue that if the game is having you do violence against a bad guy, and the bad guy is a bad guy that all of us can agree on, then I feel as if maybe there should be a little bit more leeway. And again, not kids, but certain either teenagers or even adults, young adults. There should be definite leeway in thinking, oh, this is the worst thing. This is the second coming of the devil. I don't know if there was a first coming, but the idea is that when you look at something along the lines of Doom, right? Yes, of course, it's someone shooting down. Oh no, but there's demons in the game, but you're killing the demons. You might as well be Jesus killing demons, right? It's a beautiful, glorious thing. It's not making the demons good. You're taking out the demons because they're all terrible. A similar case to, now reverse it though, right? Putting GTA aside, something like Manhunt. Should you have kids be playing Manhunt? No. No. Should you have kids playing Bully? Hell no. Right? Just because there's a kid in the game doesn't mean that it's a kid's game. And again, that just involves a bit more research on your end. You as the parent, and again, you might not be a parent. Maybe you're happy that you're not a parent. But there's just a level of not only research, but just talking to your kid. Now, I know you might not play games yourself, and that's okay. It's okay if you don't play games. It's just that when it comes to your kids saying you want to play games, look, you can look at it as a babysitter. I'm not even saying that you can't leave your kid in front of the game system for hours. You just got to make sure that what they're playing is something like Little Big Planet and not Manhunt. Which, I mean, obviously such an old game at this point. I don't know if there's been any ports. I assume your kid might be Manhunt free. But also that involves sort of looking at their internet history as well. And I know that involves, a certain level of privacy that I'm not a big fan of getting in between. But, obviously games can also be downloaded. And that does kind of skirt past some of the, ESRB stuff that we talk about. But again, maybe if you have a family computer, you go on the family computer, you see if there's a file that says manhunt.iso. And you wonder, why does little Timmy have manhunt.iso on your computer with something that says PlayStation 2 emulator? But back to the rating system at hand, though, in case any of you don't know, there is a rating system in place. It's been in place for 20 years, ever since the Night Trap debacle that frankly was, I've talked about it on an episode of Hard Mode previously, it was also bullshit as well, because the bad endings in that game allowed the women that you were trying to protect, or technically the teenage girls, they were actually women actresses, but the characters were supposed to be teenage girls. They did die. They did, which is true. They died, and they weren't the most pleasant deaths, I'll admit. No blood, though, but still not the most pleasant deaths. But they died if you failed. The goal of the game was not to kill the girls. And I think we're sadly getting to a point again in U.S. history where we're going to be having very uninformed politicians looking at these games and not knowing what the point of it is. Looking at a game like Doom, just seeing demons and thinking, oh, you're shooting them with what, love rays? Oh, you must love demons if there's demons in the game. Even though Doom is such an old game at this point. Just thinking of looking at some of these newer games and thinking, well, there's violence in the game. How do we stop there being violence in the games? And frankly, again, it does not matter so long as you're making sure that the appropriate age level is playing the game that it is intended for. So if it says an M-rated game, if you're M-rated, I think it's okay. Now, will some people lash out even with that rating in place? Yes, but as I said much earlier, that's when we have to start talking about mental health issues and maybe even other issues that, again, I'm not going to talk about here in this rant. We can't just say it's one thing, because if we just ban one thing, just the one thing, and then think, mission accomplished, we did it. Well, what's going to happen when people lash out in other ways? Or with other forms of media in this case? What's going to happen when little Timmy isn't playing the Walking Dead video game, but now he's watching it on AMC because his parents aren't actually parenting? Or, again, giving them the benefit of the doubt and not making them out to be, some evil bad guys here. They just don't know, right? They just don't know. So we need to find a way to have people talk to their kids, have uncomfortable conversations, and more importantly, have uncomfortable conversations with them. We need to give employees, if people are still going into physical stores to buy these games and movies, physical employees more power in saying, no, you cannot purchase this. Or at the very least, giving them a criteria, like a list of saying, all right, this isn't just an M-rated game. There's also nudity, there's violence. I mean, I'm sure a large portion of the US would stop their kid from buying a Grand Theft Auto game if they were told, this could potentially promote violence against cops, right? I'm sure there would be a portion of the US that would go, wait, you mean the boys in blue? Oh, no, we can't buy this for our kid, right? Because you can't give employees full power and just say that any M-rated game can't be purchased. Because again, if a kid is 17 or a kid is 16 and that parent has had a talk with their kid, maybe it's okay, right? Maybe, because now again, it's not a size one fits all, and that's the issue here with a lot of these politicians talking about the violent video games and how it seemingly is a one size fits all situation, when really it is not, right? It is just not at all. And also another thing we have to bring as well, as we're kind of wrapping this rant up, another thing we have to bring up in a discussion is for people that think, well, I went through this, or I went through this as, i.e. this, this video game or this movie. Well, when I was a kid, right? When I was a kid, I saw Zombie, the one Zombi, which was an Italian film that was extremely grotesque, and I saw it when I was 10. So because I saw it, that means that every kid can handle that. No, you're wrong. And if you're a parent, just think about that again. It doesn't matter what you saw and what your threshold is. What matters is now we have to be looking at a bunch of people throughout the US, and we have to think, well, should they be consuming this media, right? And again, as I mentioned, we have an ESRB rating system, so we already know whether or not these kids should be consuming this. And I say kids because, again, I'm not even referring to teenagers at this point. I'm referring to, 13 or 12, 13, as I'm saying, not teenagers, 12 and under, right? I remember when I was 12, 11, 12, I think, no, more 12, 13, I was watching South Park. Was that a good thing? I disagree, right? Even though I enjoyed it at the time for what it was, for all the stuff that I did think I got, but there was a lot that I didn't get either. And it's just not good not understanding something fully and then potentially imitating it, or not understanding the ramifications of imitating it. So would I show my kid South Park at 12? No. Now, if my kid was watching South Park at 16, would I, tie them up and make sure they could never, go on the Hulu account that it's tied? I'm pretty sure they're on Hulu streaming. Would I make sure that they could never look at Hulu again? No, but I might have a discussion with them depending on where I think they are in their tolerance level, and I basically say, hey, that this is a joke, this is a parody, this is meant to be funny, which means that it's not meant to be serious, which means that it's not meant to be, looked at as a guidebook on how to act in the real world. And if my kid says yes, then that's great. If my kid says, what do you mean? Cartman is my best friend and all of these characters are real, well, then there's a different conversation I have to have with my child. And I might have to take them to a professional to have that ironed out. And I think that's just kind of, again, back to the whole discussion. We have to break down these walls. We really do. And I hope that this rant helps at all. I know that I'm just some guy sitting in his living room talking to 100 people or less. But I hope that, because look, I know I'm not important, right? I'm really not. And you're listening in, and thank you for doing that. Thank you for listening in this far. But let's all be real here. I said I was going to be honest in the beginning of this rant. I'm not important. But I hope that the words that I've used have some kind of meaning to you. And if you were doing your parenting thing, being a good parent, you keep that up. If maybe you were a bit too lax and now you're a bit concerned, you reevaluate a few things. If you're someone who never played a game before in your life, now you realize where people are coming from in this debate when they have played games, and how the millions of people that have played games throughout not only the US but throughout the world aren't committing these atrocities and having these tragedies happen. And if you are a gamer, you understand, even though I mentioned only a little bit, where the other side is coming from, talking about, aggression in kids, and talking about how, maybe we shouldn't be letting these kids play these games, which I assume a lot of you gamers do know about, but I do think there might be a small minority saying, let anarchy reign, let the kids play, I played, and now maybe you understand why some people are a little hesitant on that as well. And frankly, I just want to say to any of you out there who are suffering from a mental illness of any kind, I want you to understand one thing. And I want you to know that you're not alone, and you're not a demon, and somewhere out there, someone loves you. And I really need you to know that, because if you don't, then we have a problem, and that needs to be addressed. Because there's someone out there that cares about you, and even if you don't think there is, at the end of the day, it might be you, and you might not even know it yet. And just please go out there and get help if you aren't already. And if you are, then good. Just keep up your regimen, keep up your routine. You can do what you're doing, keep on doing that, and you'll be okay. And don't think that these monsters out there that commit these terrible crimes are reflective of who you are. Thank you all so much for listening in. I love you guys so much. You keep us just being us, and you keep us, just doing our thing, and we do it for you guys. So thank you all so much. I love you guys. Please take care. I'm not going to go into depth with all the merch and the Patreon stuff. That's all listed in the description box below. If you're watching through YouTube, you know that, we have those guys on the radio as well. You know that we have TG Productions as well. Both two different YouTube channels you can look to as well for more content. And we have our Blog Talk Radio account as well. Mentioned it earlier on in this podcast. And you also know that we have our website, tgproduction.net. You know all this stuff if you've been listening, from the very beginning. And if you don't, you can easily look at it in the description box below. Please like and subscribe if you liked the video. And I've made this joke over and over. Let's end things on a light note. If you didn't like the video, if you hate my stance, if you disagree with anything I've said, you can also still like and subscribe. You can still do it. There's nothing stopping you. All right, like, subscribe, and again, thank you all so much. Love you guys. Take care. Subscribe for more content, more rants, other videos as well. Love you guys so much. Take care and see ya.